This is the final bit of chapter 15, treatment of disorders. The section on treatment illusions got cut off from part 2, so we'll just finish up here. This will be very short. Treatment illusions is its term. It's even kind of misleading, but it's a term that refers to when individuals see improvement, but it is not related to the therapy or not caused by their particular therapy. And there's a couple cases where the improvement is real, which makes the term treatment illusions kind of wrong. People will actually improve sometimes, show fewer symptoms of their disorder, but it's not related to therapy. So it's called a treatment illusion because people will attribute that to the treatment itself. And then there's actual treatment illusions where there is no actual change in symptomology. Yet people believe that they have recovered. All right, so the first variety of treatment illusion is natural improvement, or what used to be called spontaneous remission. This happens with medical disorders, even things such like cancer. But you can have a cold, and the cold goes away on itself without you going to a doctor or taking any medication. Often the body heals itself, and that can happen even with something like cancer. Well, the same thing happens with psychological disorders, is that people can improve without intervention. If you go back to the last lecture and look at this slide, the treatment outcomes of people who are untreated, some have good outcomes even with no treatment, and that's natural improvement. If someone is in therapy, they will attribute the recovery to the therapy, but it could be that the therapy actually has nothing to do with it, and that these individuals would have recovered naturally even without the therapy. It's impossible to say exactly what is the cause of the person's recovery in such situations when they're getting treatment but they naturally improve. It looks the same, and in a sense, that's all that matters to the individual, is that their symptoms have lessened over time. Right, so these refer to situations the clients would have improved without therapy, but because the therapy is laid on top there, it's hard to see that the therapy actually helped. This is how some non-traditional therapies, how they end up with support. Someone may have an anxiety disorder, and they read that a celebrity had went on a fish diet for 3 days, ate nothing but fish, and their symptoms recovered. So the individual tries that therapy. It's very likely the individual with the fish diet showed a case of spontaneous recovery, natural recovery. But it appears to have been done to the treatment. Our human mind looks for things, right? Looks for causes, and natural recovery isn't obvious as a potential cause, but the fish diet is. So this is sometimes how these non-traditional therapies get promoted in the greater public, is due to natural recovery, not an actual impact of the therapy itself. A placebo effect is another mask for a treatment effect. And the placebo effect is when simply knowing that one is being treated can help alleviate symptoms. Our mind is very powerful, and when we know that we're being treated, we tend to improve, even if we're not being treated, if we think we're being treated. This is how our mind works. It tends to see what it wants to see, and we know that if we're being treated, we will likely show improvement. But sometimes the improvement is not due to the actual treatment, but to the knowledge that one is being treated. This chart, there it is. This chart comes from a clinical research study, and a clinical research study takes individuals, in this case, obsessive compulsive disorder, and randomly assigns them to either receive a medication, in this case Prozac, or a fake medication, which is often called the placebo. So the placebo treatment group gets a fake medication. And this is a hallmark of clinical studies because of the placebo effect. People taking a medication will show improvement just because they're taking a medication. So we want to separate this mind effect from the actual effect of the medication. So this is how you would do it: a clinical trial where people are assigned to the medication or the placebo. And you can see in this case, the purple line, the Prozac treatment group, over time showed great lessening of symptoms since the beginning of the study. Right, there's some significant and noticeable differences there, marked with the stars, the last 7, 9, and 13 weeks, last 3 measurements. Prozac help alleviate those symptoms. And we know it's due to Prozac because there's a gap between the purple line and the orange line, the placebo treatment group. Now, a couple of things are interesting, right? One, Prozac improves beyond placebo. That means Prozac is an effective medication. But look at the orange line. The orange line, people taking that placebo showed a lessening of their symptoms. That's the effect of their mind. And there's the placebo effect. And you can imagine what would happen. It's not in this, it's not on this chart, but what happened if there's a group that was not treated at all? Well, I would expect them to be, maybe something like that red line, or maybe with spontaneous recovery, maybe going down a little bit. And the difference between the red lines and the orange line is the placebo effect. Those people showed real improvement in their symptoms. It's not imaginary, even though they were getting a fake treatment. The final treatment illusion is to me a real illusion. The improvement is only perceived. There is no actual real improvement in symptoms. And this can be documented in studies where symptoms are measured and recorded separately from a patient's perception. And what this means is that people often misremember their symptoms. They'll be in treatment, and at the end of treatment, they recall their symptoms as being worse than they really were. Now, this can be documented. As I said, if we were to record how much symptomology someone displays over time, from the beginning to the end of treatment, at the end of treatment, they may feel better. They may say they feel better. They may say that it has worked. But if you look at the data recording the symptoms, it really hasn't. And this is because it's kind of our mind. We may misremember things from before treatment, and we do things like thinking that, well, I must be treated, or I must be better because I put time and money into it. This is kind of a self-convincing mechanism. I've been working at it, I must be better. They really may not be better, but they kind of want to believe they're better and may perceive their symptoms as better. Besides the treatment illusions, in studying the outcomes of treatments, there are some therapies that have been found to actually cause harm, and that's the 3 ones, the 3 on this page. And I think you probably even throw in facilitated communication. We talked about way back when as one of these as well. But in these same kinds of clinical trials that I just described earlier with the Prozac study, participants would be randomly assigned to one of these programs or a placebo control group. And rather than people in these experimental conditions seeing improvement, they actually do worse than the placebo control group. A placebo non-treated group has better outcomes than individuals in these programs. So these programs, Scared Straight, if you're not familiar, is a program in which adolescents would be taken into a prison system and shown how prisons work, and have confrontations, have discussions with prisoners that were confrontational. The prisoners would yell at them and talk about how they feel that they've wasted their lives and they hurt the people in their family, and it would get quite emotional at times. Well, it's been shown that individuals who participate in Scared Straight programs tend to have worse criminal outcomes than individuals who don't. Crisis debriefing is a therapy that's often done after traumatic events, a variety of therapists will come in, and it's believed that as soon as the participants or those involved in the trauma can get help, the better, and talk about the trauma, the better off they'll be in the long run. Well, it turns out that immediate crisis intervention debriefing actually makes things worse. It keeps individuals from being able to forget their experiences and the trauma that would naturally help through time. And clinical studies have shown that crisis debriefing can actually prolong the effects of being in a traumatic uh, situation. And finally, DARE programs. Some of you may have been in DARE programs. DARE is drug abuse resistance education. And it's where police officers would come into schools and do lessons. Usually, I think in my school district was fifth grade. They would do a series of lessons over time about the dangers of drugs and alcohol and criminal consequences and social consequences of that. Clinical trials of DARE programs have shown that it actually increased incidences of juvenile delinquency, drug exploration, and criminal behavior compared to individuals that did not have DARE programs. Again, this is based upon clinical trials, random assignment of individuals to the treatment or to a non-treatment group. And these have shown evidence to actually have negative outcomes. So we end this with, just because something is called a therapy doesn't mean that it will be helpful. Just because people think that therapy helps doesn't mean that it really did. But at the same time, there are therapies that have been shown to be effective at treating the disorders we've discussed. That's it. Have a good semester.